So I'm going to be talking to you and introducing you to the concept of fuzzy cognitive mapping. Now, fuzzy cognitive mapping I refer to as a semi-quantitative technique, and you'll see why as we go through it. It's a tool that is very powerful and has been used extensively by a number of past students here to model situations of complexity. It is a predictive model, so the idea is that it is going to be used to predict what might happen under certain circumstances of complexity. So it's very much aligned to scenario planning, but scenario planning in its truest form is really a narrative technique where you create a narrative of the scenarios. Whereas what we're going to see here is that we can quantify and we can see exactly what the sort of derivations are and particular outcomes of the scenarios. But just to sort of introduce the topic of fuzziness, I just thought I'd share this with you.
Hey, you are almost black. So cute.
So you have to understand, this was my engineering graduation photograph, all right? But you have to also understand that this was the end of the 70s, so don't hold it against me. No value judgments, all right? Okay, so moving swiftly along, and I'll deny it, of course, if there is any ever comeback about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to contextualize this as a piece of research to look at you doing your applied research project report. A lot of students have used it. I always get a handful of students using this technique because it's a very powerful modeling tool. And I think that a number of you that are doing business venture proposals or social entrepreneurship projects might well want to use this because it is a predictive model and it enables you to highlight what the sensitivities are to a particular scenario, a complex scenario, as you'll see. So I do think it's quite a useful technique, absolutely, and you can certainly use it. So I'm putting this together in a sense as a research project where I want to ask the research question: what are the influences, or to what extent do these various factors of having family support, demanding job, easy access to data, and so on, to what extent does that impact on the success of your research project? All right, and by success, I'm saying submitting on time and obtaining a good mark. So I think it's probably fairly relevant to yourselves.
Yeah.
I've tried to make it as realistic as possible as I go through the data collection and modeling process, and so I think it has some value not only in terms of the fuzzy cognitive mapping, but in terms of the outcomes as well. I'm asking two additional questions. So that's the overall question: to what extent do those affect or influence the outcome of the research, the project? But I'm also asking the question: how can the impact of having a demanding job be mitigated? Right. So obviously, a number of you have a job that is very demanding on you, and how can you mitigate the impact of that? Then, what scenarios are likely to enable yourselves to submit on time and obtain a good mark? Right, so let's try and understand, as you're going forward into this process over the next 7.5 months, what are the sort of things that are likely to enable you to get a good mark and submit on time? Now, I'm not specifying what I mean exactly by a good mark, and that's part of the fuzziness of this whole thing. So I'm not saying that 65 is a good mark or 70 is a good mark. I'm just interested in that fuzzy concept of a good mark. All right, and you'll see when I get into the others that all of these concepts are really quite fuzzy. They're not strictly defined. So the engineers amongst you, you'll find that this is not a calibrated system. It's not like a control system where we've got calibrations and sensitivities and that sort of thing, but although it might well look like it. So to start the modeling process, what I'm doing is I'm saying, right, the two outputs I've defined that I'm really interested in are going to be submitting on time and obtaining a good mark. Right, so those are the outputs. That's what I'm going to track. I want to see the influence of the system on those two things. Two is quite few to have. Normally we would have a few more of them. depending on the complexity of the system that you're trying to model. So if one's looking at, let's say, project success factors, there are a number of factors that will influence or that will measure the success of a project. It might be financial, coming in within budget. It might be coming in on time. It might be technical success. It might be acceptance of by the operators. There's a number of different aspects of success that can be defined, and we would capture all of those. So here, just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just looking at two of them. This is about your process going forward. Okay, because it's a predictive model. You see, we're going to try and be predicting whether you can obtain a good mark and whether you can submit on time. What I'm doing there is I'm putting the inputs to my model. So remember I asked the question, what are these 6 things? What is the impact on these 2 outputs? Or what might they be? So I've defined my system quite carefully here. So I'm not looking at what will influence supervisor availability. Right? I'm defining that as an input into the system I'm trying to model. There are other things that will influence supervisor availability that I'm not interested for the purposes of this exercise. Because if I didn't delimit my research to some extent, or my model, it would simply grow and everything affects everything else, and that gets too complex. So I'm saying that these are now defining the boundaries, the delimitations of my modeling exercise. I'm not looking at what might drive whether I have family support or not. I'm not looking at what might drive whether your job is demanding or not. You see, I'm delimiting that. And I'm going to be changing those and seeing what the influence is of a supervisor being available or not being available, of having a demanding job or not having a demanding job. So I'm going to be modeling that. The next step that I'm going to do in this process is say, well, what are all these things influence and what are they influenced by? And so just on the basis of my knowledge of and experience over the last few years, I've captured these different things. Now, where would you get that from in practice if you were doing this as part of your project? You would do it through your literature or through a logical understanding of what influences the particular scenarios that you're looking for. So you'll see there are issues here of having an interesting topic, feedback from your supervisor, motivation, analyzing your data, writing up your research, etc. So these are all interrelated, fuzzy concepts. All right.
So would this have been an open-ended questionnaire that got those answers?
Okay, it might have been. If you didn't know, you might have asked that through some sort of open-ended or qualitative survey. I'm saying that more typically we do it from our literature. You might actually do it through some sort of a qualitative interview technique. All right. So there's different ways you might do it. Okay. Ultimately, what you're aiming for is a model like I'm going to build up now. All right. So often what people will do is they'll start off with a fairly basic model, and this is going to look fairly complex by the time we're finished with it. They start off with a basic model from their literature, and then they go and interview people, and they then enhance the model and and look for more subtleties and more nuances through engaging with people as we go along. So that's one of the ways that often people will use. Okay. So now what I do is I now look for what are the causal relationships between the different nodes in this map. Right. So in other words, what will change what? What will influence what? So the first thing that I'm going to show you is just where again, based on my experience, where I believe there to be a strong relationship, a strong causal relationship. So what I'm saying there is that, just looking at the top right, if you have easy access to data, it's going to have a positive impact on being able to analyze your data. You see, there's a logical connection there. If you have previous research experience, then it's going to have a positive impact on having a high standard of work.
Tango.
Yay!
Okay. If you have a demanding job, it's going to have a positive impact on scarcity of time. That probably resonates. Okay. And if if you have a scarcity of time, it's going to mean have a negative impact, hence it being in red, on being able to actually do the write-up. All right, you're going to struggle if you've got a demanding job to maybe do the write-up.
This is hypothetical.
Second?
This is hypothetical.
All hypothetical. No. It's actually intended to be real. Okay. As I say, what I've tried to do is to, based on my experience, to actually be realistic, because I think that you'll see that there's some face validity to it. Okay. All right, so that's what the first thing. Then what I've put on is moderate relationships. So those relationships are still causal, but I'm saying they're not as strong as the heavy lines. So things like getting supervisor feedback has a moderately strong relationship with a high standard of work. You see, there's a logic to it all. But all of these are causal links. The one thing has an impact and causes a change in the other. Yep.
So when I do something like this, because you're saying there's a relationship, but do I use some mathematical to prove that that is caused by
Not
that?
necessarily at all. Okay, so it could be based on some prior research. It could be based on your knowledge. It could be based on an interview that you have with people. You see, so there's different ways you might capture it, but it's not it's not a sort of firm, accurate measurement of something. That's where the fuzziness is. All right. You'll see there that personal motivation has an arrow on turning in on itself. So the logic there is that if you are motivated, it's actually it helps to continue being motivated. If you lose motivation, you might have experienced this, that actually it's quite a negative thing, and it kind of feeds on itself both positively and negatively. All right. And then finally what I've done is I've put down the weak relationships. So there still are relationships there between an interesting topic and getting a good mark.
Supervisor support obtaining a good mark is a weak relationship.
Say again with?
Supervisor support and obtaining a good mark. I think there's a strong relationship there.
Well, let's have a look and see. It kind of is related through various other things. I mean, we could always debate the strengths of the relationships, and certainly that's something that, if you're doing research, you would one way of doing it would be to present this to people and say, do you agree? In fact, one of the ways you could do it is even do a survey of the strength, and a student did this last year. Take that map and do a survey of people's perception of the strength of those relationships. All right, so certainly you can do it. It's a very flexible tool as to how one wants to do it. All right. So now what we do is we've got this whole map. We now want to capture that mathematically, because we're going to analyze it mathematically. And so for each of these relationships, we're going to have a number in a matrix. So what we call this the adjacency matrix. And you'll see that if I just take an example here of being bogged down has a moderately negative relationship on getting your data analysis done. If we go back to here, we'll see being bogged down has a relatively moderately negative relationship to data analysis. So every arrow is now captured in this matrix. So the adjacency matrix is the relationship between these items and these items, or those nodes and the nodes across the columns. So now we've captured this mathematically. So that's summarized the complexity of the whole relationship. So this can get very messy. All right, it's pretty messy as it is, but we can capture it in that matrix, and that then becomes the matrix that we're going to analyze. The actual analysis just uses some matrix algebra, and those of you that want to, that's the equation. So the y is the outcome of the scenario, and that depends on the inputs to the scenario, and it depends on the relationships between the different nodes. So that's just for those of you that are interested. You really don't need to know this. There's a template which does all the analysis for you. Have we got any engineers in the class, as a matter of interest?
Show yourself this one.
Come on, own up. Own up. Right, okay, so we have got a few. Yes, excellent. So you would have noticed then the similarity between that and a control system or some various engineering systems. And if you want to, you can actually work out the eigenvalues of that system, and you can pick up the stability and all of those good things. All right, because that's all it is a set of matrix algebra. However, that's not what we're really interested in here at the business school. So what I'm doing here is I'm now plotting the best case scenario. So what I'm saying is the best case scenario is likely to be where you've got family support, where you've got easy access to data, you've got supervisor availability, you've got previous research experience, and you attend the boot camp that we organize. And what do you see? Well, you see various things within the map going positive and negative, but ultimately what we're interested in is it has a positive impact on submitting on time, and it has a positive impact on a good mark. Right? So under ideal circumstances, it appears as if we'll be able to submit on time and get a good mark. Yeah.
What's the difference between the red and the blue?
Okay, so the red I'm showing is my inputs. My green I'm showing is my outputs that I've identified, and the blue are just all the other nodes within the map. Normally we wouldn't need to show those even. I'm just showing those as just for illustration. Okay. So what we see is that we're not getting bogged down, for example, if you're wanting to look at that. We can see all of the positives and the negatives in the map that way. So kind of what that means, if we go back to our map, is that, and I'm showing greens as positive and reds as negative in this particular illustration. If we have those greens, the way it cascades through the map, we can have a look at. So having family support means that we've got personal motivation. Because that's a negative relationship, it means that we don't get bogged down, right? So that bogged down goes negative. We're not bogged down, so we manage to do our research writing, and because we do that, we can submit on time, and so on. So you can see what that matrix is doing and what the chart is doing. It's actually showing how everything cascades through those complex sets of relationships and results in us, in this case, submitting on time and obtaining a good mark. And at this point, we want to check for what we call face validity. Does it make sense that under ideal circumstances, the best case scenario, that you will submit on time and you will get a good mark? And the answer, yeah, it makes sense. We do have to check the validity of our model, all right? And that's part of the process. If I wanted to, what I could do to further check up on the validity of the model, I could go back to past students and I could ask them, did you have a demanding job? Did you have previous research experience? And I could actually validate the map with actual experiences of students from previous years. So that's the validation step. Because once I've validated my model, then I can go ahead and test it and draw inferences from it. But I do need to validate it somehow. Here I'm just showing the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is where you don't have those family support, easy access to data, but you do have a demanding job. And what we see here is that that impacts on submitting on time going negative, but it doesn't have an impact on whether you get a good mark or not. All right? So if you don't have all of those things, but you do have a demanding job, the likelihood is that you're not going to submit on time based on this analysis. And just similarly showing how that cascades through the map, that's what's likely to happen. You're going to have a scarcity of time. That's going to result in your getting bogged down potentially, which means that you're going to struggle to do your data analysis. You're not going to get to the research writing as easily, and you're then going to end up not submitting on time. But notice nothing comes down here to affect the obtaining a good mark, nothing material. So again, face validity to that. Now what we can do, having established that face validity, now we can start looking at what those inputs actually influence. So what I'm showing you here are the marginal impacts. And what I mean by that is the sort of the incremental change that will happen if I have family support. And so what we see at the top there, family support results in a large increase in submitting on time and a virtually no impact on getting a good mark. All right, so that's kind of the insight that the model, as we've now validated, it seems to suggest that it's going to have a positive influence on submitting on time. But notice what happens with a demanding job. The demanding job has a very negative impact on your submitting on time, but also no impact on your mark. All right, so that's an important kind of insight that we can get. Easy access to data will have some positive influence, according to this model, on submitting on time. Not as strong as family support, but nevertheless some impact on it. Again, no impact on the mark you get. Supervisor availability has a positive impact on both getting a good mark and submitting on time. So that's clearly a key issue in this whole equation. Previous research experience, nice positive impact on getting a good mark, a moderate impact on submitting on time. So that also looks quite favorable. And attending the boot camp that we arrange has a positive impact again on submitting on time, but very little impact on the mark.
Is this boot camp real?
Is it real?
Yeah.
I'll talk about it just now. I mean, yes, it is. Okay, it is. All right. So these are marginal impacts. So we can see kind of the relative influence of the different inputs that we have identified. Now there were the two last questions. So that's one of the questions that we posed. We've now identified very clearly what the influences are. Then we had two additional questions. What can be done to mitigate the impact of a demanding job? So you guys have got demanding jobs, I'm sure, most of you. All right. So what can you do about it? Well, if we look at this, we can see that if you've got family support, the marginal impact of family support will, to a large extent, according to the model, it will mitigate the impact of having a demanding job. Alternatively, it will, if you come on the boot camp, that will also mitigate the impact of it. So, in fact, that's one of the main reasons why we started the boot camps last year, is to assist people, particularly part-time students, who've got demanding jobs and literally don't have enough time to set aside to do the writing of their proposal and their final reports. Okay, so that's why we put those in. If you've got that demanding job but you don't have family support or the boot camp, able to come on the boot camp, supervisor availability is not necessarily going to be quite enough to make up for that. But if you've got supervisor availability and either one of these two, then you can kind of make up the difference. Okay, so that's how we would analyze and answer the question of what do we need to do to mitigate the impact of a demanding job, and that's where you see it. So having family support will mitigate it, attending the boot camp will, or availability of supervisor plus either one of those two. But unfortunately, that only mitigates the impact of it. That kind of brings you back to square one. All right? It doesn't actually enable you to get a good mark and hand in on time. And that was actually the last question. Under what scenario can we get a good mark and hand in on time? And it really, a lot boils down to whether you have a demanding job or not. If you don't have a demanding job, then all you need is an available supervisor and you should be able to hand in on time and get a good mark. If you don't have an available supervisor, and also you don't have a demanding job, then as long as you've got previous research experience, then you can have that plus one of these. So easy access to data, family support, or boot camp. All right, so without a demanding job, those are your options in a sense. With the demanding job, on the left-hand side there, that's obviously more challenging because you've now got to kind of make up the difference and then still have the positive influence. So you've got to have then an available supervisor Plus, in order to mitigate that, the demanding job, remember, you've got to have family support or the boot camp. The other possibility is that you've got previous research experience, and then you've got to have 2 of these. All right, family support, easy access to data, supervisor availability, and the boot camp. So you can put yourself in one or other of these situations, and you can see potentially what you need to do, all right, in order to be able to submit on time. And this is all according to the model. So I'm not saying this is cast in stone. I'm just saying as we are modeling it, this is what you need to do. And going back to the point about this boot camp, we put that boot camp in there because we knew that there were people who were not able to actually get hand in on time, get a good mark, all right, because of their personal circumstances, whether that be family support, whether it be research experience, whether it be the job. What we found is that the boot camp can assist people to actually get their research in on time. It has a huge impact. And what we do on that boot camp is we set aside, if it's for the final report, we set aside 8 days. All right, so basically it's from a Saturday to a Saturday or Sunday to Sunday. We'll do it. We normally do it in January, sort of about middle of January. All right, so that you can take time off work. From you can say to your employer, I've actually got this commitment to the business school. You can take leave, and we sit down. It's like an exam environment, and we focus totally on writing. Wow. So it's not about content. All right, so I'm not giving lectures or anything like that. It's about you sitting down and writing. I'm there to assist you with methodology queries or analysis queries, that sort of thing. We like to get our supervisors involved to come through once or twice, or to meet with you, even if it's just electronically, during that period so that you can bounce your ideas around. And we found that it has a huge impact on people's ability to submit on time. All right? Without it, some people would be finding that they are in a catch-22, that they simply can't do it. So we've put that in place, and we'll do that for you. If I can put it into the schedule, and we're going to need to look at that carefully. I also have previously organized a 4-day boot camp, usually kind of a Thursday through Sunday or a Saturday through Tuesday, so over a weekend, again, so that you can set aside that time. And what we find is that focus of attention for that period is hugely productive. So that's what the boot camp is. All right. As I say, I haven't yet scheduled it, and maybe with this issue around deadlines, I might need to have sort of build that into the whole scheduling issue. But at this stage, might well be looking at the first week in September for a 4-day boot camp. All right, so you might, that's sort of tentatively what I'll be looking at, because we've actually got 4 cohorts, this class plus 3 others that are scheduled to submit around mid-September. So we probably will have that. It's not compulsory. There are no fees payable or anything like that. We make it available for those that can do it. It is literally impossible to schedule it so that everybody can make it. So I'm just saying that we have to do the best we can.
So we can move the submission.
Okay, you know that submission date is not a hard deadline. It's a soft deadline. We've told you that, all right?
It's the September one.
The September one, yes. Okay.
The hard one.
The hard one is the final one, which until we've agreed otherwise is end of Feb, all right? As a Santa.
But we need September to proceed, right? Because that's the year you need.
Okay, you need that approval to proceed. Now, whether you do that in August or whether you do it in September or October, you need it at some stage. That's all I'm saying.
So saying the latest you can do it is October.
No, what I'm saying to you is my recommendation to you is September. All right?
Okay.
If you leave it later than that, you're going to start putting yourself under more pressure. That's what I'm saying. So that's why I've set that date, because in my opinion, that gives you time to prepare it, because it comes at the end of, and I know some of you are going overseas and so on, so it doesn't fit in similarly, but it comes at the end of the that break before the final quarter. All right. In fact, it's the first day of the final quarter. So it means that we can, it fits in as best we possibly can. But I'm saying that if you do go later than that, it certainly doesn't mean that you won't get approval, or there won't be any marks penalties or anything like that. But I do worry that you're then going to start being under some pressure for the final submission. All right. Yeah.
I just wanted to find out, besides the boot camp,
Yeah.
I don't know that my supervisor would be well experienced in this methodology and I'll be using it.
Yes.
So can I kind of like have you as a methodology supervisor,
Yeah.
or are you only available for the boot camp?
No, the way we operate is that you'll have your supervisor, but I think I have mentioned that if your supervisor is not up to speed, then I've asked them to recommend that you come and speak to one of the faculty, be it around methodology or be it around the discipline-specific queries, all right, because they're not necessarily, they don't have to be discipline specialists. And then it's up to you to come and consult with myself or Greg or Terry Carmichael or whoever in the methodology, if that's what you do. So absolutely, I do a lot of that type of work with students. All right. So I am available for that. Yes. We don't appoint a specific co-supervisor just because it becomes an administrative nightmare, but it is part of my job to assist students with that. Yes. Okay. So just kind of closing this out, I hope you've seen kind of the process and the opportunity for this type of cognitive mapping. As I said, it's been used in a variety of different ways. It's been looking at strategic responses to competitor activity. It's been used for looking at the impact and potential response to changes of legislative environments. It's been used looking at long-term prediction of energy sources and renewable energy sources. Any number of different applications have been found for this. So it's a relatively easy technique to understand, and we've got the templates for doing that analysis. It's literally an Excel worksheet. There's no special software involved. You capture the you capture that adjacency matrix, in other words, the map, and you simply put ones and zeros into those input nodes, and the chart pops out to show you what the impact of it is. So it's an easy technique to use. It's a rich technique to use. It's not embedded with vast amounts of mathematics. All right, it's just that's there. It's semi-quantitative, so it's got the legitimacy and the validity of the quants, but it's obviously very interpretive as well. So found a lot of uses for it. Yep.
Will it be available in Sakai?
I think yes, it certainly will be. Yeah, I do make it available on Sakai. The actual template that I put on Sakai allows for up to 20 inputs. All right, so I was showing 6 inputs in this case. It allows up to 20 inputs, and I think up to 80 other nodes. All right, so it allows for huge complexity, but you should never get to that number. But that's not an absolute limit. You can make it as big as you want to, but it becomes impossible to validate practically.
So no journal should disregard this kind of technique, right?
Yes and no. It's a relatively novel technique, so I don't think that journals won't be comfortable with it necessarily. But I've just had, I'm not sure if it's accepted yet, but I've finished a manuscript where I'm a co-author on an article that's targeted at publishing in. It's an American journal, and there was certainly a query about the technique, but they have accepted it as a legitimate methodology. And it is used in other journal articles. I mean, you can see quite a lot of journal articles using the technique. So one might just have to substantiate it a bit. It's used a lot in sustainable development literature because there's the whole field of sustainability tends to be very complex with many interrelated effects, and so it's been sort of quite widely used in that area. But not all journals are going to be comfortable with it, as not all journals are comfortable with exploratory factor analysis. Not all journals are comfortable with quants. Not all journals are comfortable with qualitative. So it does vary per journal. It does vary. Any other questions or queries on this? Has this been of use to you in terms of the subject matter as well? Just to reflect on it, because that was the intention. Okay, so not just to illustrate fuzzy cognitive mapping, but also to just to provide some insight into what you're facing, and based on my experience, as I say. All right, so I will see you next Tuesday in that case, all right, 5:30. I will be doing for our next session, I will be doing some qualitative techniques, all right, so we'll be looking at that aspect and how we analyze qualitative data, and then our final session will be this time next week when we'll wrap that up and send you on your way.